Thank you so much, Dr. Fiorentino, and thank you to Westchester University and to Mayor Lillian D. Baptiste for inviting me to be just a small part of this program today. I'm honored. I think for the person that I'm introducing today, he really needs no introduction, but for those of you that are not familiar with the Senator's very rich background of just positive impact here in the county and our community, I'm happy to share just a little bit about Senator Dinniman with you. Dr. Dinniman received his Doctorate of Education from Pennsylvania State University, his MA from the University of Maryland, and his BA from the University of Connecticut. While an undergraduate at UConn, Andy served as president of his freshman, sophomore, and junior classes, and as president of the student government his senior year. He continued his commitment to public service as state senator from 2006 to 2020, county commissioner from 1992 to 2006, and as a member of 2 school boards. For his public service and for his work as a professor at Westchester University, he has received more than 175 awards and recognitions. And as Chris mentioned, we actually just honored him last week with the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Greater Westchester Chamber of Commerce. During his 4 terms in the state Senate, Andy was Democratic chairman of the Education Committee. Senator Dinniman represented the Senate on many boards and commissions, including the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, the Ben Franklin Technology Development Authority, Education Commission of the States, the State Board of Education, and both the public schools and higher education building authorities. Dr. Dinniman was named Professor Emeritus at Westchester University in 2021. During his time at Westchester University, he taught undergraduate courses including African American history, racial and ethnic understanding and global studies, as well as graduate courses in public policy. He has served as the director of both the Ethnic Studies Institute and the Center for International Programs. He is the author of numerous publications and articles, as well as academic presentations and workshops over many years. Westchester University, in recognition of Andy Dinniman's work at the university and in the community, has named a major college walkway in his honor. Andy has recently established the Together Endowment at Westchester University, which further reflects his passion and commitment to diversity, inclusion, and equity. It is clearly evident that Andy Dinniman has had a transformative impact on Westchester University, as well as on Chester County and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It is my honor to introduce to you our speaker today, Senator Andy Dinniman.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And despite the weather, you're here, and that's wonderful. First, like others who have spoken, I want to praise Cliff D. Baptiste. Cliff and I, for about 20 years, when he was mayor, and I think I was county commissioner then, we would go place to place together as a team. And I'm delighted that D. Baptiste II, Lillian, there's, like the kings and queens, we have D. Baptiste I and we have D. Baptiste II, is here to join us. And we wish her father well. He's 98 years old, and we all are praying and looking forward to that 100th anniversary, that 100th birthday. I also want to thank Dr. Ayua, Dr. Trotman, and all those involved in the Frederick Douglass Institute, as well as the support that's been given to me through the university's diversity office and the University Foundation. I see 2 of the people in the back who did all the work for this, so Hiram Martinez and June Thompson, thank you both so much. What I want to do today is first to introduce you to 5 concepts. And these concepts are really what are necessary if we're going to understand Black history in Pennsylvania and in the United States. and if we're going to understand the history of race relations. The first is that the past is never past, is it? It's part of each of our lives. It's part of the lives of our communities as well. Maya Angelou said this very well when she said that history, despite its wrenching past, cannot be unlived, but if approached with courage, need not be lived again. And we're going to see it's courage that Frederick Douglass had. Now, we also need to know, as a second concept, that while the names and places of history change, human emotions and feelings do not, do they? So the stage might look different in terms of the setting. The people might have different emotions and feelings, but it is the fact that love and hate, that courage and fear, all the repertoire of human emotions always existed. So if we're going to study history, we need to understand that, and especially in terms of this nation, in terms of Frederick Douglass, and in terms of our history of race. The third concept for us to understand is that African American history has never gone in a straight line in terms of progress. It's like a set of steps, or as Jim Trotman would say, it's like climbing Jacob's ladder. Jim is much more literature, I'm much more history, but we both work together very successfully. Now, what is to understand is every time we take a couple of steps up the ladder, the pushback comes. And we don't go down 2 steps, we go down 1 step, but that's the meaning of progress. And we saw that recently, didn't we? We thought after George Floyd and his murder, in essence, that we saw for a period of time there was progress, right? But the pushback is now. In 2022, we're in the middle of it, and it's strong. And this is what Frederick Douglass experienced. Remember, in Reconstruction after the Civil War, we had black senators and representatives in Washington, D.C. We had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution that all went away and was sacrificed as the nation, the North and the South, united. But the black citizens of this country were again in a precarious situation. And the fourth concept we need to understand of the 5 is what W.E.B. Du Bois, the great scholar African-American scholar, taught us in his book, Souls of Black Folk, in 1903. He said that there really have been 3 major responses of the black community to what they found in racism and discrimination in America. One response was separatism and revolt. And we saw that certainly in the time of Douglass would talk about, and even before the Civil War, in terms of talk about colonization. Africans in America would return to Africa. In fact, Lincoln University in this country, when it was formed in 1854, was initially formed to train African Americans to return to Africa. It was called the Ashman Institute at that time. It later became, after the Civil War, Lincoln University. A second reaction has been that of assimilation, trying to be white in behavior, trying to be white in terms of culture. We know that if your skin color was lighter, there were many advantages in America during Douglass's time and thereafter. We know that I remember from my study of African-American leadership in Washington, D.C. for my master's dissertation, that most of the leadership were called the blue-veined elite because they were light enough. They were black, but they were light enough so you could see the veins in their foreheads. So now, Douglass rejects both colonization and separation, and he rejects he rejects assimilation into whiteness. So we come to the third aspect that Du Bois talks about, and that is integration based on Black self-development and freedom. And this is where Douglass was. And this is where, and this is the legacy we need to be aware of as we move forward. And finally, the fifth concept that I believe we will find that's necessary in order to understand Douglass and his legacy and its meaning for today. And that is through the writings of Ralph Ellison in Invisible Man. If you remember the prologue to Invisible Man, and this was published in 1948, he said the following: "The invisibility to which I refer because of the peculiar disposition of the eyes of those who I come in contact with, a matter of the construction of their inner eyes. Those eyes, they look through their physical eyes upon reality." And really, the effort in this nation, in the past and today, is to deal with the inner eyes of those who are white and others who do not see the full humanity, do not see the full ability of Black citizens because the past, because bias, because of how they grew up, has created an inner eye in their heart and soul that blocks true vision. So in some ways, our effort is to clear the vision, isn't it? And this notion of invisibility has actually become a universal metaphor. To look at anyone, when someone comes in a wheelchair, we see their disability. We don't look at them as their fullness. But they have ability. They are full, and their fullness is there. But we can't see it because they are invisible. So for America, it's not just about clearing our vision for Black people. It's clearing our vision for people who make gender choices. It's clearing our vision for people who have some type of disability. It's clearing our vision for those who have cognitive disabilities. That's what Douglass was trying to tell us. That was the aspirational hopes of this nation. With those concepts in mind, let's talk a little about Frederick Douglass. And especially the Frederick Douglass who came here in 1895. He was an old person. He came because, in some ways, because he had a lot of friends in Westchester who had assisted him in the abolitionist movement. He came at the invitation of George Morris Phillips, whose building you're sitting in right now. And Phillips was an advocate, a very avid Quaker and abolitionist. And when he arrived, his speech, as Dr. Trotman has informed us, was his last major speech. And he died 19 days later on February 20th of 1895. His topic that night was, "Why is the Negro lynched?" which was part of a larger speech that was called the Lesson of the Hour, which he gave in 1894 and which was also printed in published form in 1894. In that speech, he expressed his concern about the epidemic of lynching, about what he called the Mambocrats, who would do such lynching, and what he called the specter of murder. Because you see at these lynchings, it wasn't just that someone did this in the night. The whole community sometimes showed up. In fact, in the lynching in Coatesville, there were almost 5,000 people who showed and were there. And the person who was lynched jumped out of the flames 3 times, and each time was thrown back in the flame, and no one intervened. No one said anything. So something is in our psyche, something that prevents us from seeing the full humanity, the full potential of other human beings, and that's what we have to get at. Now, when I think the other aspect is to understand, Douglass understood this. He said, let's not talk about the Negro problem. The Negro was the term of that day. Let's talk about the American problem, because that indeed is what it is. He said in his speech here, when the moral sense of a nation begins to decline and the wheels of progress begin to roll backwards, there is no telling on how low one can fall. And that's a question for today too, isn't it? Now, if we try to understand Douglass, we have to understand what's called the prophetic tradition in American social reform, both in terms of the black community and the white community and the black church. Now, this tradition, I think I could best explain to you by using a book that came out several years ago by a guy named Fielder. And in Fielder's book, the book was called simply this: America's Prophet, Moses and the American Story. And in some ways, if you simply substitute the name Douglass for Moses, you'll understand the prophetic tradition in this nation, which has always been strong. And as one person recently wrote, Jim Willis recently wrote, we have to begin to change our language and words, our whole vocabulary, if we're going to create such a tradition once again within this nation. Now, what are the attributes, according to Fielder, of this? First of all, it's the story, isn't it? Going back to Exodus, from slavery unto freedom. You know, every Jew at Passover has to say, remember that I too was a slave in the land of Egypt, or Mitzrayim in the Hebrew. Why? So that you remember the people today, and that you remember the oppressed throughout history, and that you make the commitment to do something about it. What we find in the prophetic tradition is the courage to both escape oppression, blacks leaving the South and escaping in the Civil War, the Israelites leaving Egypt, and the willingness to escape and go to the Promised Land, and the willingness to confront the oppression. In fact, if you remember in that very famous speech by Martin Luther King in the evening before he died, he said, I might not get to the Promised Land with you, but I can see it, just as Moses could see it and couldn't get there. But you as a people will get there. Now we simply have to understand that we as Americans also can see that Promised Land, but changes have to be made so that we as a people can get there. That's the meaning of the prophetic tradition in American life for all, and that was what the social activists throughout our history were trying to say. Do we have an aspirational history stated in the Declaration of Independence, don't we? But from the very beginning, it was only all men were created equal. Understand there were women and there were Indians and there were black people and others who were at that time understood that we had to go to the next steps. And many of them have helped us move forward. Now, we also have to understand that the visionaries in this nation, those who wanted us, who were a part of this tradition, as Douglass, they were messengers of hope. You can't separate hope from faith, and believe me, I don't think you can separate hope from America either, if we're going to be what we say we want to be. Perhaps Langston Hughes in a poem expressed this greatly. He said, America was never America to me, and yet I swear the oath, America will be. If you want to hear it further, you just listen to what Maya Angelou said when she spoke at Clinton's inauguration. She said, if we reclaim the dream and work for it, if we reject the hatred of the past, and if we feel and claim the pulse of a new day. So that tradition is certainly here. Now, as we look at the lynching itself in 2012, we need to understand all that was going on in this period. And part of this is to understand that, that in 1895, Douglass comes here, gives a speech warning us about the epidemic of lynching, warning us about the mobocrats, warning us about what would happen as this became a spectator sport, not a sport dealing with human beings, just as if you put two dogs together, which is a horrible thing that people still do, but these were human beings. It was a brutal affair. He was burned to death. As I told you, he tried to get out of the flames on 3 times, and twice he was thrown back, and the 3rd time he was tied down. But what was the response? Now, the interesting thing from Douglass, and when he spoke here, he spoke about the South. But coastal Pennsylvania is not in the South. He spoke about the fact, while he did not give the numbers, we know through documentation that we can document over 4,000 lynchings that took place in 12 southern states between 1877 and 1940. Lynching is clearly against the law, but no one went to jail for it. The people were accused, as in Coatesville, when the suspect, they knew who did it. It was no secret. They were brought to trial, but an all-white jury said they were innocent, just like an all-white jury would say in the South in terms of most of those other lynchings. Now, there is something interesting here. I think if you look at the response to that lynching, you can see the 2 responses in America that we spoke about. The response of Douglass and the response of the antithesis of Douglass. The governor of that time, Governor John Tanner, strongly condemned the lynching as a betrayal of, quote, democracy and human decency. And he asked the legislature to take away Coastville's right to self-governance, which the legislature ignored and never did. Now, at the same time, there was a gentleman, a Chester County writer, who wrote in a magazine at the time in this county called Crescent Magazine, who wrote the opposite of what the governor was saying, the opposite of what Governor Tanner was saying. He wrote this to explain and defend the motivation of the mob. He says, quote, it was not lawlessness. It was the exact opposite. It was justice. They were people, and the law was made by the people, and always subservient to their will. That was his justification of lynching. Hey, it sounds somewhat similar to those who attacked the Capitol, doesn't it, recently? So you have the two traditions you see in the nation, the Douglass tradition and the anti-Douglass tradition. Now, how does this all, by the way, Pennsylvania did pass an anti-lynching law as a result of what occurred in Coatesville in 1923. The NAACP, which was formed in 1909, 1910, the Coatesville lynching was one of its first cases, and as it started an anti-lynching effort. It failed in most states. It passed in Pennsylvania, and it never passed in the U.S. Senate, where there was a dire anti-lynching law. And it didn't pass to many, many decades later. And you didn't need an anti-lynching law, did you? Isn't killing someone murder? Isn't that against the law? But it was to make it clear what our nation was about, that we don't go about killing each other, that we respect the humanity of each individual. Now, how does Douglass, by the way, fit into this whole matter of nonviolence? You know, Douglass was nonviolent, essentially, but he did meet 11 times with John Brown before the raid at Harper's Ferry. Now, he didn't participate in the raid, but he understood. He understood that there are times that one has to stand up. And in fact, with that, exactly what happened in Coatesville in 1938. when there was an attempt at a second lynching. A gentleman named Bud Ward, if my memory serves me right. He was accused, as so many of these lynchings were, that he supposedly had raped a young white woman. And the crowd gathered for the lynching. It didn't take place because two things happened. One, there was a decent police chief in Coatesville who dispersed the crowd. Second, the black community armed and went to the street. And the county got nervous and called in the National Guard. So that lynching didn't take place. But again, the attitudes of 2011 didn't change, did they? The notion of lynching that Frederick Douglass came here to speak about still continued on, didn't it? In the North, in this county as well as the South. You know, Chester County has been rather schizophrenic in terms of race relations. On one hand, there was slavery in this county, which you might not be aware of. There were about 500 slaves in the 1700s. We know the names of each slaveholder, thanks to Chester County Historical Society, and we know the names of many of those who were enslaved. Now, this eventually ended when Pennsylvania passed an anti-slavery law. William Penn, our founder, had slaves. He might have been wonderful in terms of the liberty of all people in terms of religion. And the first statement of religious freedom was here in Pennsylvania in the Great Law of 1698. And we have the copy of the law itself in Harrisburg in the archives. I was able to see it and share it with people from this county who came up. But he wasn't different when it came to slavery. He kept those slaves. Some Quakers didn't, but he did. Now what happens then is when the black community went through an experience, their second attempted lynching, they realized that they needed to have the help of a national organization. And thus, in 1938, the Coatesville branch of the NAACP was founded. It was founded in that AME church, which is right as you go through South Coatesville there on that corner. Those of you who know the community well. And we're going to stop at this point on this part. And I want to go on to and explain something else that fits in. You know, an historic marker was put on this spot in 2006, and many of us in this room, I see a number of people who were there at that ceremony. And it was right near the Lincoln, you know, the Lucan Steelworks, and where you have the high tension wires now as you go down Route 82. Now, the authors of the book on the lynching of Zachariah Walker, one of whom was a professor at Millersville, said that neither a gesture towards healing nor closure, the marker simply documents these events. The marker might have done that. That's what markers do. But the people who were there certainly understood its significance, and soil was taken. As you know, there is a project in Montgomery, Alabama with a new museum that has a jar, and in that jar is the soil and the blood of those who were killed as it went. And in that jar, for every single one of those 4,000 documented lynching, people were lynched, is in that museum today, as a reminder to this nation about what had occurred. Now, there was also a ceremony of remembrance that took place in 2021. And in closing this part of the talk, I want to read you from that, parts of that remembrance. This was led, in fact, by a group, Teresa Thornton and a group of people in the black community, as well as whites in Diversity in Action, and the Orient community in the Phoenixville area. And first, we need to understand the prophetic tradition, don't we? And we need to understand Douglass was expressing this. But we see Douglass written all over, writ large, in this document. It's not really a document, it was just in a mimeograph form, the 3 parts of the service that was sent to me. It says, the first part, that the past and the future that America is to live up to its aspirations of freedom, equality, and justice, and the consequences of not living up to those. That's what Douglass came here to talk about. And let me read you from this so that you get an idea of each of the parts. In terms of the past, it went this way. We gather here in body and in spirit and virtually on the ancestral land of the Lenape Nation. On this site 110 years ago, Zachariah Walker was brutally lynched by a white mob. We gather to remember this atrocity and many, many lives violently taken all through the centuries of lynching and persecution. That's Douglass talking. That's the continuation of the Douglass legacy. And it goes on to say, in terms of the next point, that Douglass and Moses and all those involved in trying to have us live up to what we should be, they talk about the struggle both as a society and the struggle of each of us as individuals. We all have demons, right? And we all have to confront those demons, but the society also has its demons that has to be confronted. And Douglass gave us that message and told us if you don't change, you're going to have some difficulty as a nation. You're not going to be the light to the world that you aspirationally had said you wanted to be. So here from this service is the struggle. We confess our fear and reluctance to change. In all the ways we have benefited at the expense of others, forgive us and help us to place the command for justice above our desire for comfort. Comfort is the words in this service that was used for struggle, because it goes on to quote from a Unitarian minister the following. He said, if we have any hope, remember it's hope, and struggle and hope of transforming the world and ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort. And then, finally, it tries to put this together in this way at the service. It says if we the following: we gather I get the right quote here. It's over here. Our God, O God, whose hearts are fearful and constricted, grant courage and hope where anxiety is infections and whiting. Where impossibility close every door and window, great imagination and resistance. Where distrust twists our thinking, grant healing and illumination. In other words, clear those eyes, as Ralph Ellison would say. Where spirits are daunted and weakened, grant soaring wings and strengthened dreams. Amen. That's the word of Frederick Douglass in 2021. That's the word of the social reformers. That's the word of Moses, put into who in many ways was and continues to be the prophet of this nation. You see the past, the struggle, the hope, the putting of all this into a unified concept. It says, in essence, it urges us, it cajoles us to live up to our aspirational dreams that were stated when this nation was founded. And it says we can do it, but it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a struggle, but no struggle is achieved until there's hope, until the dream, until the goal is clearly stated. So really, what Douglass is saying was similar to what Langston Hughes was saying, wasn't it? And I swear the oath, America will be. It was similar to what Maya Angelou said, the pulse of a new day begun. And it was similar to what was said when we heard James Weldon Johnson's song that we sang together, the Black National Anthem, when he says, facing the sunrise of a new day begin. What comes after that? March on till victory is won. Perhaps Emily Dickinson summed it up for all of us when she said in the poem 3 words, "America, dwell in possibilities." And when those social reformers have used the word, "and yet," meaning there's more that we can be. Chaim Potok said, the author said, "and yet are the 2 most delicious words." I love that. Delicious words in the English language. Because that's what America's about. It's about "and yet." And if we're going to be, as Reinhold Niebuhr said, a light to the world, our light's fading right now in 2022. But we can relight it again, can't we? We can be the light to the world. We can bring about our aspirational hopes. And in saying that, we remember Zachariah Walker, but we remember the other Zachariah too. The Zachariah of the Old Testament, who in 9:1 told us to be prisoners of hope. Wow. Words that don't go together. Usually prison's not a good thing, is it? Prisoners of hope. And we don't want to escape from this jail. And we're not going back until the bars are off. And all can be prisoners of hope. So the question for us in 2022, and one which we want to talk about in our discussion, is this. It's a simple one. We're prisoners of hope. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to change America? What are we going to do? Now, let me conclude this way before we have our discussion. We're not in good shape right now as a country, are we? We're in pushback, remember? Pushback phase. And as prisoners of hope, we better get our act together so we stop that pushback, right? Douglas gives us some advice on what to do. All of the prophets of this nation. And nothing wrong with being a prophet. We have a prophetic history. And in the black church, I learned from Reverend Croft that at one time many black churches had people who were called prophets who were in the church. So that we have something that's very special. Now, what we have today and what we face is this. We are in the era of a shrill, hyper-partisan rhetoric that has created a divisiveness, hatred, and even violence in our nation. These individuals are anti-everything. Anti-black, anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-gay, gay and lesbian, transsexual, the whole alphabet. And yet, they are there, and they grow. What you might not be aware of is that there are more hate groups in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania than in any other state in the United States. That the largest mass shooting of Jews took place only several years ago in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at the New Life Synagogue. That 67% of the American people, according to the story in the Inquirer, believe that our democracy is in crisis, and it may well fail. This is not an easy time. It was within that atmosphere that I decided to put together was called the Together Endowment. I gave the first $25,000 to this endowment, and people are starting to contribute and also to work with us. This is part of standing up to the pushback. In fact, just yesterday, a major leader of one of the largest companies in this county, he and his family gave another $25,000. Mr. DeBaptiste has given money towards this, as he always does, to good causes. We'll get to our first goal of $100,000. I'll make sure, and we'll get beyond. Actually, it's sort of fun. I can go to all those Republicans who couldn't help me in my campaigns, and I can now say, here's somewhere you can give money, man. And I helped everyone. I didn't deal with this party stuff, but we'll make it. Now, what are we going to try to do? And I'm going to say this briefly. First, we have to understand that our current method of intergroup relations isn't working. It's really 2 forms. One is the cognitive form, where we say, just tell people what's going on, and then they'll change. Well, that doesn't happen, all right? People, when cable TV came, everyone thought that was going to liberate the nation. No. If you either listen to Fox or you listen to MSNBC. And in fact, politicians, my friends from central Pennsylvania Senate told me when they went to a door, it was what station they were listening to that determined what they needed to say when they entered the door. So cognitive knowledge doesn't liberate. For many, for some it does, but for many it doesn't. The second approach I call Alcoholic Anonymous approach. We go into these meetings, and the first thing we're told is, admit you're a racist, admit you're an anti-Semite, and it might be true, but that doesn't necessarily change the person. They'll say yes for the point of the meeting, but they leave more defensive and more difficult afterwards than they were before they entered the meeting. It's the same, we assume that political correctness leads to change. Often it leads to defensiveness, which is expressed in the votes that we're seeing of people in this nation, and those votes are increasing, not diminishing. So the need for something different is obvious. And the three approaches we're going to try to use, and we're going to use the knowledge in this university. We're going to bring the community together with the university, which has been one of the things that has lacked. What has happened is the university and scholars are here. The community is here. And they don't meet because the wisdom here is not transformed to the wisdom of the legislature. In fact, most bills that were passed, there was very little discussion about the reason for the bill. It was more, who gave the money and in whose interest are we doing this bill for? That's what would occur in the caucuses, both the Democratic and Republican caucuses. Oh, yes, surely if you had a good chairman, they could talk about the purposes and et cetera, make their appeal. But it really came down to those reality of money and interest. That's the state of our democracy right now. So our new approach is threefold. One, we're going to use the technology and social media. Two, we're going to focus on the commonalities of human behavior. Douglas told us it's not just civil rights, but what? Human rights. So we're going to focus on our common humanity, using both cognitive and affect, both together. And thirdly, we're going to use the powers that come from the aspirational beliefs that we are trying to make the America that will be. Now, briefly, technology. We're losing the war on social media. We have to get better at it. We have to have the ability to answer people effectively, both in physical space and in cyberspace, right? Second, in technology, Professor Anita Foman has been a leader in helping us understand the use of DNA. A very simple thing, the ancestry test you take, they advertise in television, you'll be amazed at what it does in terms of opening people up and clearing their vision. What if I now am 20% black? As much of this nation is mixed. What if I'm now 20% Jewish? Then doesn't that, or 20% Muslim, doesn't that change you as a person? Doesn't it require you to ask the question, who am I? What am I to do? And in the answering of that question through discussion guides that Anita, who's here with us, has prepared, that's when we create the change. That's when we clear up the vision. In terms of the commonalities, people will respond as they did to Douglas if you get them to understand the commonalities of being human. Now, this is where Ralph Ellison comes in, isn't it? This is where we have to get at those inner eyes, isn't it? This is where we need to confront directly the invisibility that exists. And let me give you two examples, and one more, and then we're over. You've been very patient. In fact, I was amused when the film was put out at this award ceremony that each and every person said, he's gregarious. What they're really saying, he talks too much. But that's part of being a professor, You see, let me give you two examples of this. One took place in Kennett Square. If you remember about 10, 12 years ago, there was the English-only movement, and there was a lot of tension. And so I was invited to come down to speak to a group of people who had a meeting to sort of move forward on English only. And when I got there, what I said finally was this. I said, I'm not asking you to do this because it's right, though it is right, to reach out to those who don't speak English. I'm asking you to do it for your grandparents and your parents. When they came here, they spoke Italian and Polish and Hungarian, and you know it. And they were treated by the establishment like dirt, and you know it. So now you of the third and fourth generation better start to understand what your parents and grandparents went through. And do you know, the meeting ended without any problem, because the commonality was shown. I'll give you another example. I'm very good friends with Sister Marie Consuelo Sparks. Sister was an IHM nun who actually taught here for about a decade. And we had a program together in Mexico. And I was with her at this event, and these people were making these anti-Semitic comments. And I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to embarrass Sister in front of the others. But you know what she did? She held up her hand. And she said, see the ring on my finger? I'm married to a Jew named Jesus Christ. And you know what? They apologized and everything stopped. You see, we have to be trained in how to deal with these individuals on social media and in physical space. And we have to take them on, but you take them on by showing the commonalities, by showing the fact of the humanity of all people. And finally, don't underestimate the aspirational power in this nation. It works when you appeal to it in the right way. Maybe a third of the people, or I'd even say a quarter of the people, we're not going to get to. And a quarter of the people are 90 or 95% there. The people we have to deal with, are the people who are clearly in the middle. And we can do it. So in concluding, let's say this, that the Together Endowment attempts to bring people together, to develop new approaches to mutual understanding and respect, using new research, technology, and social media. It will do so to enable us to confront the struggle, Douglas's struggle that he spoke to us about, with hope, and proclaim the pulse of a new day, and work for the reality of an America that will be. And remember that we are prisoners, right? We're prisoners of hope, as Zechariah told us. What a coincidence. The person lynched was Zechariah Walker, and yet we go to Zechariah in the Old Testament, who he was most likely named after. Prisoners of hope. And remember this, in terms of as prisoners of hope. When you dream alone, it's only a dream, isn't it? When you start to dream together, is what Douglas and the social reformers told us, when you start to dream together and act together, it's the start of a new reality. So thank you, and let us begin. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's very kind of you. Change is not done by massive numbers of people. So we're here. Aren't you proud to be a prisoner of hope? Say it. Well, say it with me. We are what? Prisoners of hope. Douglas Wood is looking down upon us with great pride. Is he not, Dr. Troutman? And no one knows more about Douglas than my friend and scholar, Dr. Troutman. So I know if he says yes, it's yes. Now, what do you think? Let's spend, we don't have all that much time, but let's spend some time talking about it. How do we do this? Where are we going to go? And one of the reasons we're doing a video, but we're going to take it into different communities. A lot of people couldn't get here today, especially many of my friends in Coatesville. And we're going to take it into Coatesville and into Phoenixville and into this county and start to have these discussions because we need to create the change. Listen, you have to just make up your mind, as you have already, that there's something special about this nation. And we're not going to let a bunch of people take it away from us, are we? So what do? What about these new ideas? What about these concepts? What do you think? Any thoughts? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, go ahead. Stand up and tell us who you are, and then we'll go for it.
I think that they're fantastic. I think one of the things you need to do, there are plenty of us old people around. Instead of looking at us as being old, chronologically we'll accept it. But if you put these computers down, see, I came along when not everybody had phones, cars, or TVs, but we communicated very well. You know, I was out there with Reverend Dr. Martin King and John Wilson, that we did national things together a lot better than you all are now. The wisdom will always overtake the smartness. So people look at you as being smart, but the wisdom will always outweigh. Well, you know, so we've lived these things, and it's the mentality. If we old people, as you all want to call us, you get the young people to understand and they change their mentality. Like I tell a lot of people, we're not saying go back to the 50s and 60s. What we're saying is taking what we've lived, experienced, and our wisdom and figure out how to blend it without all of you all doing this. If you all ask us questions, we can 9 times out of 10 answer them and answer them intelligently. If we ask you all something, you're going to push it in on your computer, and it's going to be a lot of grammatical errors. And also, even in Vietnam, in 1966, you can't change a person's mentality because we are all prejudiced about something or some things. It doesn't necessarily mean a color against a color. For instance, I can give you 2 examples. One, we were talking in the tent one day, where's this young man? We were calling the Negro there. Negro means black in a lot of languages anyway. But anyway, this one fellow said, I was raised not to like color. Well, I could deal with him because he didn't know why he didn't like us. He was raised that way. Another young man, I have a brown star with a V device, so I'm not saying it to brag, but every life I saved was a Caucasian. It just worked that way because my parents told me you get cut. Y'all gonna bleed red. Okay. And this other fellow, we had 3.2 beer, we didn't even have full beer. So this one guy got all fired up after I saved his life. And he said, you know, Bond, I used to not like color. I said, oh, turn that with a big T. You like me because I saved your life? What if I had not saved your life? Would you have liked me then? In other words, as far as I'm concerned, you don't like me now, just because I saved your life. And then it made me also wonder, what if that had been me out there pinned down? Would he have come to try to help me? And he's the one person that I would love to see right now asking, how you feel about me now? You still don't like me? Or is it just because I saved your life? But if we could get the young and the old to figure out how to blend, rather than acting like, they know everything and we don't, we're just old, this could go a whole lot further, a whole lot further.
Well, we appreciate what you're saying, and part of what you're, Bill, can you take it to when it first gets up? Sure. We know what you're saying, and part of the problem right now is people are afraid to talk to each other, aren't they? Afraid to talk about race and gender. And so we can't have a conversation. So we have to somehow, in the together endowment as we go forward, to make it safe. That people could say, because you can't get anywhere until they talk. You can't get at those feelings unless they're willing to convey them. And that's one of the problems. Do you know that, I'm a fellow in this thing called, it used to be the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, then they changed it, they had to change its name, because Wilson was a segregationist. It's now called the Institute for Scholars and Citizens. And I just came back from a conference in the South on this. We meet every year, a group of politicians and scholars. They try to bring us all together. I was convenient because I was at both. But there were 6 of us from Pennsylvania, actually. And one of the realities is that almost, well, it's in the 60s. 68% of college students now say, and they interviewed thousands of students in 2021, now say that they're afraid to talk, that their college and campus environment is not conducive to a discussion of race or gender. Well, we have to do something here too, don't we? We have to make it safe, a safe place. Because if you don't have the conversations, we're not going to get anywhere. Others who might want to talk. Yeah, you want to Bill will give you the microphone here.
Hi, my name is Donna Roland from Coastal Area Branch of the NAACP. And I agree with Mr. Bond, who's our president. But right now, we have to figure out a way, how do we motivate not just black youth, but all youth. I mean, when I was raising my son, we had 2 books in our house, the same book. It was how to motivate black youth. And he didn't have enough motivation to even read the book. So my thing is that we have to use technology, the technologies out there, that to reach them in the way they need to be reached. We have to take Frederick and translate it into, like the Bible is sometimes, into another language that they understand. You know, and we can't forget the past. And I heard you, I think you said was it the Jewish would repeat,
Yes.
was a slave. Well, maybe young black children need to repeat the same thing. I was a slave, because half of them don't even know that they were, their parents or their grandparents were in slavery. So we have to reach them, we have to motivate them, we have to let them know how important the past is, but we have to do it in a way that they understand.
Well, Donna, I think both you and Mr. Bond have well said it. And your dinner, remember the title of your dinner, A Call to Action. And so what this is about, and what the Endowment Foundation is about, is a call to action. Others who haven't spoken, who might want to say something. Anyone else? Come on, you have some ideas here. If you don't talk, then we have to get a conversation. We have 1 or 2 other comments. What else? Come on, we'll give you a second. Yes, go ahead. We'll come back with the microphone for you. And then 1 more after that.
Hi, I'm Tina Shirley-Helmaniak, also from Coatesville. I'm a faculty here in graduate social work, and part of what we've been doing over the past few years is helping our students get more civically engaged, because that's also part of what is missing, is that there's a lack of people that are showing up to vote. So when we look at who is voting, it's oftentimes a small percentage of who is electing our officials, including in our local elections. And our local elections are so important that we don't oftentimes pay attention to them. We're just paying attention to what's happening in the presidential election. So really focusing on how can we get every 18-year-old registered to vote, and how can we get them engaged also in volunteering for elections, volunteering for campaigns, and helping them to realize that their vote matters. We had a panel yesterday with Senator Comita, who talked about it was, 78 votes is how she was elected. Like, if we don't realize how each individual vote matters, then nobody's going to show up, because they're going to think, well, it doesn't matter if I show up.
Well, this is part of the effort, is to get people engaged. And one good thing in this university is that part of your graduation requirements is to either take courses or to be actively engaged in terms of citizenship. So we're really talking about the meaning of citizenship in America today, aren't we? And citizenship now is even more complicated because we're global citizens as well. And so one last comment. Who would like to say something or has something that they could add? Yes, go ahead, please. We'll get you the microphone. And thanks, Bill, for your service.
People have to begin to see people as people. I'm a people person. So I'm going to use Bill as an example. So that way we're not afraid to reach out to different people. We talk to people. Everybody has a story. And typically, in a one-on-one conversation, we'll share it. It's always interesting to hear what you have to say, someone else knows. But how I first met Bill, I'm just going to use this as an example. Bill and his lovely wife, who is here in review, I don't know sign language, but I met them. They're people. They all want the same things that almost everybody else in this room wants. So I reached out to them. I joined one of their classes just because I wanted to be able to communicate with them on a different level. And now whenever I see them, like today, I do the little bit of sign language that I know, and I say hello. And people that they've helped in the deaf community, I see them, and they see me, and they're like, hi, and hi. So it's no different than anything. And I think, for whatever reason, we've become, I don't know, afraid of people, but I don't know if it's just me, and I just like people. So I want to know your story. And I may not remember your name, but I remember your story. I remember your story. I may not remember your name, but I remember your story. And that's how I believe, Senator, you connect with people. You remember everybody's name, but you can remember their story. And so you make it seem as they matter to you. People matter to me, and I think we've gotten away from that.
Well, I think what you're saying is what Maya Angelou has said many times. It's not what you say, it's how you make people feel. And we have to begin to figure that out. Well, listen, my friends, first of all, when you leave, we have the foundation, the Together Endowment is part of the foundation, and we have a whole booklet for you describing its ends and what we're trying to achieve. Please take it. It's not just donations of money. We want people actively involved in it, too. And we're going to have to, in some ways, try to create this community by community. I mean, my experience is that Coatesville and Phoenixville and Westchester are different places. With different, sometimes with different attitudes, different demographics. And we also have to become increasingly aware of that this county demographically has changed. That, if I draw a 25-mile circle, if I draw a 25-mile circle around Exton, we now have over 30,000 people of Indian descent, people of color. Now, in the 1950 census, there were only 7 families that identified themselves that way. Wow. So we have an increasing Islamic community, Hindu community. There's a new Hindu temple being built. I think there's 3 or 4 mosques now in Chester County. The Jewish community has increased substantially here. So actually, if we put it all together, we probably are over 1/3 of the population. So we need to help by reaching out to others, not being afraid of the conversation, creating an atmosphere that allows it to take place. And we need these new type of approaches. How do you do it? What do you say in physical and social space? How do you create the commonalities that are so essential? How can we use DNA most effectively and other changes in technology? And finally, how do we state how proud we are about the aspirational purposes of this nation? How do we finally make the Declaration of Independence a reality for all people, men and women, people of color, people who are white, people of every faith tradition? And that's our goal, so please pick that up on the way out. I thank you for coming, and we will be going, and we'll be calling you because we're going to be going into various communities now with this message as we go forward. So God bless you, and thank you. Thank you.